Get ready, it's time for the Daily Breakdown with Mr. Keelan. The fabulous Friday Rickroll. You can't beat it. Hope you enjoyed that. That was especially for you, AJ. Hope you really enjoyed that one if you're watching. Happy Friday, everybody. Yay! It's been a dream week, and what a dream day. House reviewer representing my house. Awesome week, everybody. Great jobs. I've been really enjoying reading all of your responses, looking for some more detail and description in some of them, but overall, I've been seeing some really great thought on the ideas in the lesson. So, way to go. Let's get into our last lesson of the week and get ready for the weekend, and you'll be getting into a whole new set of units coming up next week. Thanks again, everybody. Let's check out our objectives. Alrighty, everybody, let's get into our final lesson of the Constitutional Convention. Next week, we'll be going back to a little bit more of a regularly scheduled broadcast, trying to pick up where we left off before the Corona break. But let's finish this up, and we got to get to the ratification of the Constitution. So we're going to look at the two different groups, factions, that had built up after the Constitutional Convention in regards to whether or not we should ratify the Constitution. And a big bone of contention between these two groups was the need for a Bill of Rights. These two groups are known as the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. So let's get into it. So first, after the Constitution gets passed by the Constitutional Congress, the Confederation Congress says that it has to go back to the states for approval or ratification for each of their conventions. So they have to have a vote or ratification. In order for the Constitution to go into effect, to be the official law of the land for the United States government to exist, 9 out of 13 of the states need to go to approval. Remember, the U.S. had won its independence. The Treaty of Paris recognized it, but the government of the United States, as we know, does not come into play until 1788 with the official ratification of the U.S. Constitution. How about that? So throughout each of the states, there is a campaign and election and a very fierce debate on whether or not the state should join the United States and accept the U.S. Constitution and ratify it. There are many people who fear that the Constitution went too far, that it gave too much power to the national government and took power away from individuals in the states. There are others that argue that without the strong national government presented in the Constitution, the nation was going to collapse. So you have one side saying our freedoms will be ripped away from us. The other side saying that our lives are going to be at risk because the whole nation is going to collapse. So those who wanted a national government, who were pro-Constitution, who were pro-federal government, are called Federalists. Makes sense. Those who are against the Constitution, those who are scared of a national government, are called Anti-Federalists. They're anti or against a federal government. So let's meet some of the Anti-Federalists. We have some pretty prominent Americans from the Revolution, like Patrick Henry. Give me liberty or give me death. You know, that guy. The founder of the Sons of Liberty. One of the most important people in the cause for American independence, Samuel Adams. Didn't like the Constitution. The writer of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. Even though he's still coming over from France, he writes and is very outspoken in his opposition to it and his belief in a Bill of Rights. And my man, George Mason of Virginia, the author of the Virginia Bill of Rights. These guys are going around and making the argument that in their state, and also writing essays and so on and so forth, saying that the Constitution should not be ratified, that the state shouldn't approve it, that there's just too much power in the executive branch, and that in right hands like a George Washington, all right, that maybe the nation will run good, but if you give that same power to a not so noble person, somebody who's not as well intentioned as George Washington, they could take that power, and absolute power corrupts, and it would lead to tyranny. They fear that a strong national government couldn't serve all the states well, that states are better left to govern themselves for the most part. So to kind of get going back to the quotes from your warm-up, they felt that the extreme law of the U.S. Constitution would lead to extreme injustice for all Americans and a deprivation of their rights. But probably their strongest argument came in the fact that there wasn't a lot of protection for natural rights, for basic rights in the U.S. Constitution. It begins with the words, "we the people," but the rest of the document didn't really talk about the people, it talked about the government. And they felt without a Bill of Rights, similar to what existed in England before the war, similar to what many states had adopted, most notably Virginia, that the powerful federal government would eventually usurp their rights, just like the king usurped or took the rights of the American people, leading up to the Revolution. It would suck them all up. So governments become more powerful if the people have less rights, and unless you guarantee protection in law with the Bill of Rights, the government will eventually take those rights away. That's a pretty powerful argument. On the other side of the coin, we have the Federalists. He has some pretty big notables. George Washington, although he didn't really come out and argue it, he did put his name on the Constitution. He approved it and thought it was a good idea. John Adams, who's also coming from France at the time, supported the ideas of the Federalists. But the three most important guys to talk about are over on the right-hand side of your screen, and that's Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. We'll get to those guys in a second, but they make the argument and also write essays and so on and so forth, pushing for states to approve or ratify the Constitution. They felt that it built the strong government that was needed to allow our nation to run effectively, to become a nation of the world. That without a strong central government, with the Articles of Confederation, everything was falling apart, and that the states would turn against one another and everything would fall into chaos. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay write a series of essays under a pseudonym, under a pen name, called Publius, which comes from the term for in Latin for public, kind of saying, like, we're speaking on behalf of the public, that this document is good for the public. These letters are published in newspapers and printed all around the 13 states. Eventually, they'll be collected together and are known as the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers are seen as one of our other really important founding documents. If you look at Supreme Court briefs, constitutional scholars, they go and fall back on the Federalist Papers in order to get what the ideas were or how to interpret the laws and intent of the Constitution. So the Federalist Papers were a real important legacy to leave for the U.S. In subsequent years. This argues that the Constitution is good. It actually won't be the national government won't be too powerful, that it's balanced, because the national government is limited through the separation of powers, checks and balances, many things we have discussed in the other lessons. It explained in plain language the different parts of the Constitution so that everyday people could understand how the federal government wouldn't become too powerful within the constitutional system. And they made a lot of arguments against the Confederacy. They said that if we stay in the Confederacy, eventually we'll fall into factions and then we'll turn against each other. And that we need to unite, that we need to be one country instead of 13 separate states, 13 separate countries, loosely working together. We need to unite as one country. The Constitution is the glue that can make that happen and make us become not a confederacy, but a union. They also argue that a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, that the government can't grant you rights, that natural rights are God-given, that you're born with them. So therefore, the government can't just wave a magic wand and give you permission to have something that you already have. It's kind of a weak argument, but that was the argument they made against the Bill of Rights. So we're going to see that argument will fall apart.